Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And big thank you to Megan and Brad and everyone on the Mo Engage team for having us. During this session, we're going to take a closer look at one of AVTasty's customers, Hanna Andersson, and how they use experimentation to enhance the customer experience. So I'll hand it over to Morgan quickly to introduce herself, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Hatfield. I'm marketing analyst over at Hanna Andersson, which I'll go into detail in a moment about what Hanna Andersson is if you aren't familiar. But I have been with the company for about 2 years now. I'm responsible for our experimentation program that we rely heavily on AVTasty for, as well as all sorts of customer and marketing data analysis.
And just so everybody knows, we did not plan the plaid shirt coordination here.
I didn't even notice that.
I just noticed it. So my name is Mary Kate Cash. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at AVTasty. I'm joining you from North Carolina today, and I have almost a decade of experience in SaaS and about 5 of those years in SaaS marketing, specifically with Diligent Corporation and SalesLoft, and now AVTasty. And this is the part of my job that I love the most, which is getting to feature customers that you might not know are pushing the boundaries in terms of bringing experimentation and building experimentation culture across their business. So before we jump in, I want to take a few minutes, like Morgan said, to talk a bit more about Hanna Andersson, who they are, what they do, and AVTasty, and who we are and what we do, so that you have a bit more context when we get into the interview portion. And then just a little overview of what else we'll cover. So once we talk a bit about Hanna Andersson and AVTasty, we're going to dive into the experimentation program at Hanna Andersson. And we'll talk about their program evolution, how they got started, what their goals and KPIs are. We'll talk about how they've been able to drive experimentation across different functions within the company and talk about the impact that that's had on their customer experience. And then we'll save a little time for Q&A at the end. So let's get my slides to change here. So Morgan, tell us a little bit more about Hanna Andersson.
Sure. So as you can probably guess, now that we've got some visuals here, Hanna Andersson is a kids clothing company. We have been in the business since the early 80s. We were founded here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm located, by a Swedish couple. They actually started the company out of their garage because they found that at the time here in the US, we were lacking high quality premium children's wear that they had originally gotten back home. So they brought that to the States. We started as a mail order catalog only company. Then over the past couple decades, opened stores nationwide to about, as of 2018, I think we had about 70 stores. But now with COVID, we have gone solely digital. So we are doing 100% of our sales online now. So that I'll speak to that later in the presentation, but that's certainly put more emphasis on our experimentation program here. And then other than that, yeah, we sell high quality kids clothing. We do all of our designs in-house. And if you've ever seen family matching pajamas, especially at Christmas time, our brand is responsible for creating that trend back in the early 90s. So just a little fun fact.
Christmas cards everywhere. Okay, so I'll tell you all a little bit about AVTasty. We have a few years under our belt, starting back about 10 years ago as a CRO agency in France. And for any non-e-commerce people on the call, CRO typically stands for conversion rate optimization in this context. So we were running a CRO practice as an agency, and then after spending a few years in the trenches with customers, our founders saw the need for a tool to facilitate that experimentation and personalization that's driving CRO to help their customers optimize. And ultimately, they seized the opportunity to turn into a full-fledged tech startup with their in-house tool, which is now AVTasty. Since then, we've developed multiple products ranging from simple A/B testing to hyper-targeted omni-channel personalization campaigns, and even more recently into product development optimization with AVTasty's flagship product, And we do all of this with the intention of helping our customers create better experiences designed to help you grow your bottom line. So just to get in a little bit around how we do this and what exactly that means, sometimes software, we speak in a lot of acronyms, CRO, CDP, SDR. So I just want to dig in a little bit more about, what is this tangibly? So what we do is we facilitate all facets of a platform designed to help you ultimately display digital experiences to different customers. So that could manifest in personalization, where I show somebody that's interested in rain boots, more rain boots, versus somebody who is located in Canada, more made in Canada brands. And it could manifest differently, or it could be just pure experimentation. A lot of people will show one group of people a blue button and another group of people a red button, and those people might convert at different rates. And so it's being able to actually facilitate those changes on a digital space. So we help do that. And we also provide a framework for AI-based audience segmentation. And that helps you say, I want this group of people with these particular traits or features to go in this group for this test versus these types of people. Helps you segment out, the people who are in Canada to see those Canadian brands versus the person who is interested in rain boots. We can tell you that they're interested in rain boots. So with AVTasty, you can collect data from countless data points, integrate with your CDPs or your customer data platforms or data layers or data lakes, which allows you to have a more 360 view of your customer. And I heard the previous session talk about that as well. It's very important to know your customer in order to personalize properly for them or to show them relevant experiments. So you can use these data points to really understand what they're interested in, how they're engaged with your site, understand their full journey. And those are data points all collected by AVTasty, unless you're also using an external data source to hook in with it. And then that allows you to optimize and personalize their experience to ultimately increase your engagement with them and your revenue. So why is this even important? This is a funnel. I'm sure this looks familiar to a lot of people. You get people in with the intention of hopefully driving them all the way through and having them repeat purchases or repeat conversions, whatever conversion is to you. For some people, it's request a demo. For some people, it's actually buying an item online. For some people, it's getting people to subscribe to a newsletter. So whatever that conversion is for you is that bottom of the funnel. And so everybody's funnel has leaky spots. You lose people at every step. It's natural. And if you have a 100% conversion rate, kudos to you. Please tell me your secrets. That's like the ultimate goal. I don't think it's possible, but anyways, happy to be proved wrong. So the cost to get people in that funnel is increasing every year. And ultimately the cost to acquire new customers also increasing every year. But what we found is by optimizing the experience, you can drive that cost down to be more efficient with your spend and to get customers converting at a higher rate at a lower price. And so where do you see the benefits of that? So you can reduce your acquisition costs, like I said, by as much as 50%, which will in turn help lift your revenues by 5 to 15% and increase the efficiency of your marketing spend by 10 to 30%. All in all, by creating an effective optimization program, you can quickly achieve ROI and start edging out your competition. So now I'm going to get into the part that we're all here for. I want to talk to Morgan about Hanna Andersson's experimentation program. I really like the way that they have set up their program and the culture that they've built around it. So to kick us off, Morgan, can you tell us a bit more about the program at Hanna Andersson and a little bit about how the team's responsibilities are structured and your approach to it?
Yeah, definitely. So to give a little background context, when I started at the company, we didn't have any kind of formal testing or experimentation program. the marketing digital teams had used a couple tools in the past, but never had a dedicated effort behind it. So shortly after I came on board, that was something that our VP Digital is a huge believer in, and had tasked me with hitting the ground running, if you will. So you can see here on the slide, we've kind of grouped this. I like to think of it as these three different areas: test ideation, test execution, and then test results analysis. And you can see that this isn't just it's purposely a cycle, because it's always about iteration. So that first piece, or I guess in terms of the team, I manage all parts of these myself, but that said, I couldn't do it without my team. So I work really closely with our e-commerce team, our site merchants, UX, our developers, QA engineer, sometimes other departments too. So while I am the one that is primarily executing tests and doing the analysis, I work really closely with a bunch of people in order to make that happen as well. The test ideation part is very collaborative, so I definitely could not do that all on my own. And then to give a little bit more context into each of these, I think we'll get into it a little more detail on some future slides here, but in terms of the ideation, one of the things that we do here at Hanna and that we implemented really early on with the program is soliciting test ideas from the whole company. So we actually have just a simple Google form that we'll send out. Anybody in the company can send a test idea. And part of that is that we really want to build a testing culture, and great ideas can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be within digital. It can be a different department. So that's a big piece for where we get our test ideas. A lot of this too will relate to our company initiatives that we have quarterly. And then in terms of executing, I will do majority of that myself. That's the beauty of a tool like AVTasty, is I only have a little bit of HTML and CSS and JavaScript knowledge. Certainly can't write it all from scratch, but if we do run tests like that, I can rely on our AVTasty support team, and they're great at that. But that being said, we are able to do the majority ourselves. And then last but not least, it's analyzing the results of the test. So a key part of this is that before I launch any test, I am calculating an estimated runtime based on the amount of traffic that we'll need to reach statistical significance. And so I communicate this out to the team so that I set expectations in terms of when to expect results, because one critical thing I've learned with testing is, and that I try to teach the rest of my colleagues, is that we don't want to look at or make decisions early with the data, especially if it hasn't reached significance. So they've gotten pretty good at knowing, it's not statistically significant yet. Okay, we'll keep waiting. But yeah, once we do hit that stat sig, we'll check the test at the time when I think that we'll reach stat sig. And sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. In that case, I'm discussing with my immediate team our next steps, if we want to keep running it, if it's worth doing it, or if we'll chalk it up to be inconclusive. And then I'll communicate those results out to the team. And the key part here, as I said, it's an iterative process, is figuring out next steps. So no matter if the test is inconclusive, or if we do see a conversion lift, or maybe we see a conversion hit, the key point here is figuring out what we've learned from that and what we're going to do next about it. So that's something I track and can talk a bit more about later.
Yeah, I think the piece, it's hard to say which piece I love the most, but I think the piece that I love the most is that you allow ideas to come from anywhere. And so to me, I feel like that's a great way to get people to feel like they have a little skin in the game, and really care about the experimentation program and how you guys are taking that approach, which just helps build that culture. So speaking of building and growing, this is a really great graph here of the number of tests that you guys have been able to implement since you started working with AVTasty about 18 months ago. And this is pretty astonishing to me. You guys ramped up really quickly, got moving. And so how did you do it? How did you get started here? And, what kind of lights the fire here?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Yes, you can see we ramped pretty quickly with our tests here, and I'll talk more about this in detail. I feel like I keep saying that, but in terms of how we got started so quickly, it was certainly helpful that we brought on the tool during our holiday season. A big piece of that is that being an e-commerce company, as you can imagine, majority of our sales are in Q4, and we will go into what's called a code freeze, where we're not making any development changes for that. It's roughly the last 2 months of the year. That being said, we were able to use AVTasty a lot right when we started with the tool, because there were some gaps that we needed to cover during that code freeze. So I can talk more in detail about that later, but that definitely was a piece of it. But wanted to highlight these 3 items that you see on the side here. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier on, but one of the critical components is having what I like to call an executive sponsor for testing. So as I mentioned, our VP of digital, she really wanted to get a testing program going and was a huge pioneer for that effort. So I think that's definitely kudos to her for allowing me and the team to be successful, because we've had that executive level endorsement of this from the beginning. So that's really been key to getting this off the ground. Sort of related to that, another important piece is communicating our progress and our wins and our learnings. So pretty much from day one, part of the process is that we are sharing our results, or just not even all the results, but also weekly updates on tests that have launched or tests that have ended. That's something, an update that I send to our entire leadership team, as well as our merchandising and digital teams. So that's been able to kind of light the fire, get more people in the know about what's going on. And over time, that's what leads to more test ideas and hence more tests executed. And yeah, other than that, I think I kind of touched on everything here, but just having that process defined and priorities helps with this as well.
Yeah, great. So I have an example here that I want us to jump into a little deeper so that we can touch on some real life examples of what exactly you're doing as tests. And so something that you and I talked about was the way that you guys use countdown banners. And I think that this is very clever because, and I'm going to give you a chance to tell the full story here, but what you've done is you saw success with a countdown banner. And then much like you were talking about in the cycle earlier, you tried to think like, okay, how can we make this better? Are we timing it right? Are we using it often enough? Are we using it too much? And I think that that's a really important part of the cycle to consider. Is like, yes, you ran a test and you saw a good outcome from it, but what then can you do to build on that? So talk to us a little bit more about these countdown banners that you guys like to use.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I like to joke with our team that we might be one of the top users of this. I'm not sure. I don't have that information, but so you can see it's a little bit small here on the slide, but on the right, obviously that's our homepage. I guess that would have been 2019 here, but we were running a friends and family sale. And on the left side, beneath that banner, you can see a countdown clock. So that's a widget that's built within AVTasty that we decided to leverage, counting down to the end of the sale. And the hypothesis here being that if we're showing our users when the promotion ends, that'll create a sense of urgency and light that fire into them to make that purchase sooner rather than later. So we had used this right around when we got started back in 2019. But at the time we just put that countdown banner on for 100% of our audience. But later we decided, let's actually test this because, it does take time to implement and QA and whatnot. Not a huge lift, but is it worth doing? We want to understand and be able to measure that impact, especially because we tend to have a lot of different promotions. And so one of my theories was that, and Mary Kate, you mentioned this, but if we can't run this for every promotion, that doesn't make any sense because we're going to lose out on our, urgency message there if we're doing it all the time. So let's figure out when we can really make the biggest impact with it. So this friends and family sale was one of our biggest ones we had done, and that with that banner, that countdown in particular, we did see a conversion lift. And then here now you can see on the side, we've got a lot of different examples of when we've used this in other places and ways we've started to iterate. So we did prove that out, that we were able to generate a conversion lift from displaying it on the homepage for a very critical promotion for us. So then we wanted to try integrating that onto our cart in addition to the homepage to see what kind of impact that would have. And we looked at it in conjunction together, also as different tests. So a user could see it on the homepage and on the cart, or one or the other. And then we ran it again, having both or none at all. So we're tweaking different variables like that. And then we've also more recently, this here on the left is a countdown for our Easter. We just had Easter. Can't believe it's going to be May in a few days. But yeah, that's advertising the shipping cutoff. So that's something we've started to use this banner for as well, and try to understand, because we have a lot of different shipping methods when this countdown is most critical. Because obviously we have free shipping for standard, but then you can also wait until 2 days before and overnight it to yourself. So when does this countdown really make sense, and for which holidays? And then, yeah, just some other examples on the right side here of using it for Cyber Monday, Black Friday, things like that.
I see the matching PJs in there.
Oh yeah.
Have to make an appearance. Cool. So great little mini case study. So let's take another little half step back and talk about your goals and KPIs. So all of this experimentation, you're driving towards something, and you're using this for particular purposes. So let's talk about what those are and how you consider defining success, and what you're looking to achieve by managing an experimentation program and using a tool like AVTasty.
Sure. So to provide a bigger picture before I get specific with our program at Hanna, I've been in digital for a long time, built my career in that, been agency side. And I used to think of, in my mind, A/B testing as just limited to CRO and trying to optimize the site's conversion rate. But I've quickly learned that there's so much more you can do with it. And I think it's, my belief is that it's limiting if you're only using it for that regard. That can certainly be the most powerful, because that's where you're going to see the biggest impact. But you can also get a lot out of a tool like this in some other areas, like risk mitigation and incrementality testing. So to talk about those in more detail, obviously conversion optimization, hugely important. That's where we're focused on improving our conversion rates. And other metrics that we'll look at that level up to that are our add to cart rate and our product view rate. Critical things like that obviously are going to all level up to that ultimate conversion and transaction from the customer. So this is certainly an important part, and that countdown banner I just talked about would have been an example of this. But that being said, I also wanted to share today, as I mentioned, these other areas where you can use a tool like this. So risk mitigation is a bucket that that's what I like to call it. And this kind of falls into a couple different areas. So earlier I mentioned the concept of code freeze, us being an e-commerce company. So during something like a code freeze, we're not able to touch our code or make any developmental changes, but with a tool like AVTasty, we can do things. Trying to remember an example, like we might have a small bug, but we could quickly kind of do a Band-Aid approach using AVTasty to temporarily fix that while we can't touch our code. But then once we're out of code freeze, we can have our developers permanently fix it, and we don't have to leverage the tool anymore. So it's great for things like that. So that's one side of it. But then some other areas that we've used the tool for are when we're looking. So I mentioned earlier that we came from catalog, brick and mortar, and we've been doing digital for a while. But as of 2020, or I guess early 2021, we are 100% digital. So as you can imagine, through this evolution, we have gone through a lot of sophistication with our website, and maybe some things we had on there before don't make sense anymore. Things are always changing. It's very fast moving online, and especially with best practices and things like that out there, it's constantly optimizing from a UX perspective and the customer experience. So just because we had something yesterday doesn't mean it's going to make sense to have 3 months from now. So we'll often do tests like this where we might look at, and I'm working really closely with our UX team to do so, but maybe they're looking at removing something and replacing it with something else. But if I always try to press with the team that if it's possible to do this with a test ahead of time to actually get that data before we invest all of the developmental resources and budget into it, if we're able to get that data from a test first, that's hugely valuable to us because that's time and money saved. So that's one example. And that goes hand in hand with adding new features as well. We might be able to, if we can test it ahead of time, let's do it. Because I'm sure a lot of people attending today know that development resources are not cheap. So the more learnings we can get up front, the better. And then last but not least, the third bucket is incrementality testing. So here is where we will essentially measure or attempt to measure the impact that we're getting from adding things to our website in terms of, well, it can be new features, but also new vendors or tools. So when we first launched our testing program back in 2019, right around the same time, we had just added PayPal to our website. I mentioned digital sophistication, finally got that on the site. So we wanted to understand, we're of course paying fees to PayPal, and it does take resources to have that on our website. So we wanted to understand and actually put a number behind it. What is that lift in conversion that we're getting from adding PayPal? I don't think there was any question with the team of whether or not it would help us. It certainly did, but we were able to actually quantify what that conversion improvement was by hiding it for half of our traffic and then taking that benchmark. So not only do we have that number that's really great, honestly, to share with the leadership team, and then they can share that amongst other stakeholders as necessary. So we have that proof point, but also we're then able to use that as that benchmark number for figuring out like ROI in the tool that can be helpful for contract negotiations or renewals in the future, as well as figuring out too, all right, where's our baseline? Because with certain vendors or third-party tools we add to our website, there's ways that we can certainly improve it, or maybe there's other features with that vendor we can take advantage of. So by having that baseline number, we can then figure out how much further can we go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Makes a lot of sense. So I know that we're like in talking about adding new features or taking some away. I have another little case study that we can talk about here, because while this isn't necessarily adding a feature, it's kind of diverting attention to a different type of visual. So I'll let you explain a little bit more about this test, but I really like this case study, and we actually have a fully fledged case study about this test on our website that Morgan and the team at Hanna Andersson was gracious enough to work with us on. But there's an element of lifetime value with kids' clothing. So the earlier you get in with parents, the younger their kids are, the longer you have to have them as customers, as opposed to getting in with them when the kid's a little older, you might only have a couple years left. And so this is a test where, and like I said, Morgan will do a much better job of explaining this, but the added feature here is essentially changing the picture that people see so that it resonates more with them, and makes them want to buy it for their child. So, and hopefully it's a younger child. So Morgan, explain a little bit more about this test and what you guys were able to find from it.
Yeah, so essentially, I think this was mid or early last year, we expanded our pajama line sizing wise to go all the way down to, or I should say, this long john silhouette that you see here, it's 2 separate pieces. We extended the sizing to go all the way down to baby toddler size, whereas previously it was only for older children's sizing. So when in doing so, our photography team had started to shoot the images for both like a smaller baby toddler size and the older kid size. So you can see on the left is a little bit smaller version of that product. And on the right is our kid size clothing, or the kid size version of the product. But we wanted to understand, one, is it worth us shooting? Because this is the same product, but it does look visually different when you change the sizing or go down so many sizes. So even though it's not on model, it's a flat, we wanted to understand, is it worth our photography team's time to shoot, twice the number of images for all of these different products when it's really the same product. But we also, as Mary Kate, you mentioned, the baby toddler market is really critical for us, because if we can find customers at that point, we'll be able to retain them for longer. So all that being said, this test that we ran here was swapping that image, so that if you were navigating to this product through a toddler or baby product listing page, then the default image would swap to show you that smaller size first. And the same thing would happen on the product listing page as well. So this is actually we don't have those pictured here, but this is actually a multi-page test, because all going back to the customer experience, we want it to be cohesive. So of course needed to match. If they were to click from that page, it needed to have that same image. That being said, I was actually pleasantly surprised at the results, because I thought, oh, this is a very valid test, but I didn't think visually it would be different enough to the customer to generate any kind of measurable impact. But that's why we test, because you never know what's going to resonate with customers. It actually did have a pretty significant increase on our product, or on the buy rate for these specific products. So that was really exciting for us. And like Mary Kate mentioned, a lot more detail in the case study. But this is something that we are now, because we're able to prove it out via testing, we are now implementing time and money behind it to make this more of a future. We'll do this in the future, but with a system that will allow us to do it in a much more automated way.
Yeah, I think with clothes, especially, people like to picture themselves or picture their children wearing it. And as you can clearly see, there's a difference in a toddler's shape versus in older kids or in adults. And so it just makes it that much easier to visualize your child, as opposed to what, like your kid wearing like an adult's clothes. So that was super interesting to see. So let's bring it back, full circle, and talk about like, how has building this program and running experimentation, how has it allowed you to engage better with your customers? And let's talk about like the customer impact here, really.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think you can see there's a lot of different, circles on the side here of different touch points. There's a lot of different examples of this, but there's so much we can do with the tool, and we're really trying to get more savvy with this as to all the different touch points we could have. Early on, something we started doing is when we're running campaigns with different influencers, personalizing the landing page to have a banner that welcomes them or something like that. So right when we started with the program, we had placed an ad in the Skim newsletter. I'm sure some of you listening are probably familiar, because they have a pretty big following now. But when visitors had clicked from that banner in the Skim's newsletter over to our website, or when they clicked from the newsletter over to our website, we had a banner, had a little bit of Skim branding, and basically said welcome, and things like that, or something that we're trying to do to personalize that experience a bit more. And more recently, we've been doing that with other influencers. Some other examples, this is related to what we just talked about, but that photography, we want to make it as easy for the customers as possible, especially now that COVID has forced even more digital or online shopping. What can we do to make that experience easier to shop online? If you can't try the product on, or if you are new to us, how do you know, what's going to fit your child the best? So let's see, to give another example, and we can we'll show a visual of this in a moment, but we have been, because we're going solely digital now, we're trying to figure out how best to interact with our customers with those on and offline touch points. So we, of course, have customer care center, always have, but before we also had a retail stores where customers could go, and now we don't have those. So as a result, a lot more of the customer service related things have all moved online, or when I say online, I mean to our customer care center. So, or virtually. So our customers are either having to call, email, or chat with us. So we do have a chat widget on our website. So we've definitely seen a lot more activity with our customer care center. But one of the, I guess, learnings we had here is that while we do have a live chat on our websites, this wasn't previously, this hasn't been very prevalent. So on the majority of our pages, it was located in the footer. And if you're like me, you know that you're not going to scroll down to the footer on every website page that you go to. So we were trying to figure out what could we do to increase the usage of our live chat tool? Because if we're able to get more customers interacting with our chat, as opposed to making a phone call or email, that might be, maybe it's their preferred form of communication. Maybe they don't want to call or email because they prefer chat, but they don't know it exists. Also, if we're able to move more of that customer service volume over to chat and off from phone calls, we can save money. So that's definitely a piece of it as well. Anyway, so the picture that you're seeing here is a test we just recently concluded. We wanted, like, as I mentioned, to see if we could increase our chat usage. So the first piece of that is, well, the hypothesis is it's so buried in the footer, do people know it exists? So let's make that feature more prevalent and see if that increases usage. So that's just very, very first piece of the process here. And this is a great example of relying heavily on the AVTasty team because we had to do quite a bit of custom JavaScript for this one. But you can see our team, we provided these little chat bubble icons. So UX team designed that and we passed it over, and the AVTasty team was able to help code this up for us. But essentially the way this test works is that if you were on the page for a certain number of seconds and you were showing engagement, then this chat bubble would pop up in the bottom right corner, and it would be what we refer to as sticky. I don't know if that's a term we use internally or just if that's an industry term, but basically it would stick on the page as you scroll. So you would always be able to access chat throughout your shopping journey. And yeah, we happy to report that we saw a huge increase in our chat usage from this. So this was a great win for us. And we actually, if you go to our website now, you will see it on there. We have since moved this over to a 100% personalization. But this is really great because we're, of course, I think, improving on our customer experience here, but this isn't the end all be all. So this was a critical piece of information that I was able to give to our, customer care, UX, and e-commerce teams. And so now we're figuring out, okay, if our customers certainly do show an interest in using it, if we make it more prevalent, how else can we improve it? So, in today's age, it's not just customer care queries, but also personal shopping is huge, and having that concierge service. So that's something that customers certainly miss now that they can't go into the store and see, their normal salesperson. So how can we recreate that experience online? So that's just this is just the first part of the journey, but certainly great to be able to get that data early.
Yeah, I know you guys have done such a great job transitioning from, even looking way back from catalog to brick and mortar, and now brick and mortar to digital. And it's a huge lift. It takes a lot of work, and there's, I think taking an experimentation approach is a great way to make sure that you are keeping the customer and their experience at the forefront of the direction that you're taking, and making sure that they're still able to find what they're looking for and get recommendations, much like they would if they had gone into a store. So it's really nice to be able to do that and understand how to best do that before then going in and investing all of the resources to actually implement it. So
Definitely.
Great job to you and your team. And I know we had a little chat from one of our friends, Stephen, who says that they successfully tested having faces in their chats. So that's just a further example of another way to optimize or check and see if that does have an impact on how often people use that chat box. Hey, Stephen. So now I'm just going to move on. What's that?
I said, shout out to Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah,
Stephen and I used to work together. Fun fact for the audience.
Yeah, we love Stephen. So let's just talk about our key takeaways here and just general advice. So if somebody's looking to build more engagement using experimentation, or maybe they have gotten started and they're trying to figure out how to grow it, what are your key takeaways and what's your advice?
Yeah, so I think touched on several of these early on, but to reiterate, that first one here, finding a sponsor, that executive sponsor is huge. I mentioned we have our VP who has been a huge endorser from day one. So that's definitely very helpful. Dedicating a resource. So like I mentioned too, when I joined the company, we had done some testing in the past, invested in some tools, but there wasn't a dedicated resource behind executing it. So it's easy to fall to the wayside or forget about if that's not a key effort. But part of that does, truth be told, I think go hand in hand with that sponsor, because and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in the executive team right away, but essentially what it comes down to is having someone else within your organization that cares about it and is going to hold you accountable. Because if it's just you trying to go after it, it can be a little bit harder. That being said, it's not that it can't be done. I just find that if you're able to have that outside resource or someone who's looking for updates or wanting to know and is invested, then the program will be a lot more successful. And a piece of that, I'm jumping to our fourth bullet here, but sharing successes and in learnings, any kind of learnings, even if it wasn't necessarily a success outside of the department or that immediate team. So that's been a big part of building our testing culture here at Hanna Andersson, is that slowly over time, as we've been ramping, more people have become aware of what we're doing. And then that kind of just, it's a ripple effect. So the more people that are aware of what's going on, they'll become more invested and ask questions, contribute ideas. And so it does take, commitment and patience. It doesn't happen overnight. But yeah, starting small is key there. And just to give some other examples of things that we do to communicate out our testing, or to communicate updates with our testing program. I mentioned that we do a weekly email update with, goings on. But another piece too is that I run a internal quarterly testing review, and that invitation is extended to anybody in the company. So you're probably noticing a theme here. We solicit test ideas from anybody in the company. I should probably mention our company is about 150 at corporate. So we're not, Nike with thousands and thousands of employees. That might get a little out of hand if we were to solicit test ideas from everybody. So a little disclaimer there. But anyway, having that quarterly meeting is another touch point too of ways that people can get involved and learn. And I like that too, because some people prefer to digest information by reading a weekly email, and other people may prefer to attend this meeting once a quarter. So we have these different avenues for colleagues to get invested and learn and know more about it. So yeah, that quarterly testing meeting is a critical piece, and something we're doing too is the conversation today has been focused on our website in particular, but testing isn't just on the website. We have, all of our marketing channels, and we will run tests there. We've got some testing that we do with our merchandising team in terms of testing out products and doing surveying with customers before we actually develop or while we're developing products. We're doing testing to understand what's going to resonate with our customers before we actually go and manufacture all of it. So there's things like that as well. And I actually we'll incorporate all of those different testing components or programs into this quarterly update. So that too slowly gets the buy-in and excitement and investment from other teams, because as we integrate these other testing areas, we're able to see, what's overlapping, and we're getting more people involved. So yeah, I think, oh, and then the last piece is just learning from inconclusive tests. So I will tell you, no shame here, we have had far more tests with inconclusive results than we've had with a solid, very measurable, significant kind of lift. We've also had tests where we've seen declines in conversions. So I think sometimes it can be tough if you're the one down and, seeing these inconclusive results all the time. You can be discouraging at times, but I'm a huge advocate that we do learn from every one of these tests that we run, even if it is inconclusive. So yeah, that's something I just always like to reiterate with the team, is that, anything you're learning, every test you learn something, and it's never a failure, even if the numbers technically show, that it might be in that sense. But yeah, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's an iterative process and always learning and always trying to improve.
Well said. Very well said. So now we're going to take a break to jump into questions. Thank you so much, Morgan. If you have questions, drop them in the little QA tab on your Zoom button panel, or use the chat. We can see either. So to start us off, Morgan, earlier in the presentation, you talked about test prioritization. So how do you prioritize your tests?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different frameworks out there. If you're familiar with testing, you've probably seen or heard of some of them. There's one of the more popular ones is called the PI framework, potential importance, which PI stands for potential importance ease. So we do something very similar to that. We just add a fourth layer in. So when I get test ideas or too many where I do need to prioritize, I will score a test on these 4 criteria that we have, which are how easy it is to build or execute, the cost to execute. So normally if it involves a heavy lift with development resources or AVTasty support team, it's going to be more of a complex test. So while we're not actually forking out dollars to do it, it's additional resource time, aside from just myself. So that'll be another big factor, the test runtime, how long we need to run it to get significance. And then last but not least, the potential impact to our revenue. Great.
Yeah, I think the time piece is one that is a question that we get a lot. How often does it take to run a test? And I know you mentioned this earlier, but just to kind of build on it, it really depends. If it's your homepage, you might get a lot more traffic to it quicker. If it's a buried page, it might take a little longer, and you want to make sure that you have enough traffic for it to be statistically significant. So that can definitely be a factor, but there are also some ways around it. We have a feature of our tool that will dynamically allocate traffic towards a certain version if it can tell that it's going to win. And so it'll help you reach that statistical significance a little bit faster. If you ask me the nitty-gritty details of how it does that, I'll have to direct you to somebody on our tech team, because I don't understand the algorithms involved. But we have another question. How do you balance the different experiments you're running? When do you start, stop? How long do you let experiments run before you deem them as successful fails? And I know I just touched on that a little bit, but I'm just also going to build on this question a little bit. I know you mentioned inconclusive tests. So where do you kind of draw the line between inconclusive and conclusive?
Sure. All good questions. I think something that came to mind that I did not mention earlier as part of the process. This is a plug for Asana, my favorite project management tool. I get way too nerdy about the tool, but I had a former boss who was obsessed and got our whole company using it. And now we're using it at Hanna. Anyway, this is not a presentation about Asana, but that is what I use to manage our entire test program, experimentation program. So I can keep track, because we, as you saw in that graph earlier in the presentation, we've quickly ramped our number of tests, and we could have as many as 10 going at once. So I'm using that tool to map out, keep track of what's going on and when, and projected end dates, and when I need to check in on all these tests. So I will calculate upfront based on the KPI that we're trying to impact, and which pages it's on, or estimated traffic. I will calculate a projected end date of when I think we will be at statistical significance. And given our web traffic and the test we're running, it's usually, the average is probably like 3 to 4 weeks. It can vary depending on time of year, of course. But so I will have that end date in mind when I first launch the test, and then I'll have a to-do for myself to check back on that projected end date, in which case I will check the results and calculate whether or not it is statistically significant. And this is where it really depends on the test and what it is, the variable, and it really depends on the specific test. So at this point, we might hit statistical significance. Great. We end the test, share the results, move on. But more commonly than not, we haven't. So this is where it really depends. And if it's something that is, maybe a higher funnel element, like a navigation change, maybe that's something that we're not as concerned with having significance on, and it's more about understanding, are there risks if we're removing a feature or something like that. So basically what I'm trying to say is, the further removed from your end goal of actually making that transaction, we tend to be less concerned about hitting significance every time. But if it's something really far down in the funnel that's going to, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know, the color. We have not tested this, but for simplicity's sake, the color of our place order button or something like that. We would, really want to make sure that we're understanding risk and with conversion there before we make any kind of conclusions. So I could go in more detail, but I know we're getting close on our time here. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Morgan, for letting me steal you for this presentation. I love talking to you guys about your program. I think you do such wonderful work, and making that shift to be fully digital, like I said, is no small feat. And I think taking that experimentation approach is really awesome.